Now, just based on what we were looking the other day, um, we were looking on how we can use the concept of mapping in Microsoft Excel so
Mhm.
that we can be able to merge together different variables that may come probably in some many ways or in some varied ways. Now, if we look at our data set here, if we look at our data set here, we have got some aspects here, like for instance, we have got revenues. And if you check on these revenues, if you check on these revenues, you realize that there's a company that records its different transaction sources. And the very first thing here, we have got revenue from supermarkets. So you realize that there are different sources of revenue that this company records. And the first one, as you can see, is revenue from supermarkets. If you keenly check here, we have got revenues from discounters. From this idea, I can see revenue from retail. We have got revenue from grocery.
Mhm.
Now, at the end of the day, probably we'd want to have just a single line item of revenue. Maybe we wouldn't want to have like revenue from supermarkets, revenue from discounters, revenue from grocery, and all that. We just want to have one single line item that will be called revenue. Now, if we make an assumption that we'd want to prepare, for instance, an income statement, if we make an assumption that we'd want to prepare an income statement, we'd want to prepare an income statement. For our income statement, the general format, probably those who are in the accounting and finance background may understand this. The general format of an income statement will take the format of sales or what we call revenue. We have sales or revenue. Then what happens from sales or revenue? Here, we are going to subtract the cost of goods sold. We will subtract here the cost of goods sold. What is the end product of this? The end product of this is what we call the gross profit. The end product of the revenue, you subtract the cost of goods sold, gives you what we call the gross profit. From the gross profit, you will add other incomes if you have. You'll add other incomes, and the end result of this will be total revenue. The end result of this will be total revenue, total revenue, total revenue. Then what do we do from here? From here, we have operating expenses, which we will subtract. We will subtract the operating expenses. We will subtract the operating expenses. We will subtract the operating expenses. And what will this give us? This will give us what we can either call the operating profit. This will give us what we can call operating profit, or in other words, the earnings before depreciation, interest, and tax. Earnings before depreciation, interest, and tax. This will give us the earnings before depreciation, interest, and tax, or what we can
Tax.
call the operating profit. Then from here, we will proceed to less our depreciation here. So from here, we will subtract depreciation. We will subtract depreciation from here. And if we subtract depreciation, we simply reduce the D element here. And what we'll have at the end of the day is EBIT, the earnings before interest and tax. From here, we will subtract our interest charge, we will subtract our interest expense, we will subtract our interest expense, in other words, called the finance costs. From here, we will subtract our interest expense, which in other words is called the finance costs. And at the end of the day, we will have our earnings before tax. We will have our earnings before tax. We will subtract the tax expense for the year, we'll subtract the tax expense for the period, and at the end of the day, we'll be able to achieve our net profit. So this is the general format that this would take. Probably, I know, like in some things like the computation of the cost of goods sold, there are some aspects that are involved. Like for you to get the net sales, there are some aspects that are involved. Like if you have maybe the sales, the sales returns and all that, there are some aspects that may be involved in this. But generally, this is the format that we have. Now, checking onto our data, we have got revenue from different sources. Over here, I can see there are also cost of goods from different sources and all the other information that we have here. I can see we have got interest expenses, we have got taxes and all that. Now, we just want to ensure that at the end of the day, we have a single information for this. At the end of the day, we have a single information for this. In other words, if it's revenue, it's just revenue, because we wouldn't come to our income statement and then we start saying revenue from supermarkets, revenue from discounters, revenue from grocery. Then we add all that, then that gives us the revenue. All right. In the income statement, what the shareholders want to see is only the revenue. So probably that would be within the intercompany analysis now for your own analysis. How you would want to see maybe probably the performance of the revenue from the supermarkets, revenue from discounters, and all the other information. So that will be for your own benefit. Now, we're going to employ the concept of what we call mapping. We're going to employ the concept of what we call mapping to be able to achieve this. We are going to employ the concept of what we call mapping to be able to achieve this. Now, what are we going to do? What we are going to do here, number one, let's introduce filters to our data. But before then, I want you to add an extra column here called mapping. Just add an extra column here and name it mapping. Add an extra column here and name it mapping. So this column over here, name it mapping. Good. Now from here, I want us to introduce filters to our data, And how do we introduce filters? Move over to data, Then here, click on filter, data, then filter, data, filter. Good. By introducing filters, we have these funnel-like icons. We have, the drop-downs. We have the drop-downs at the end of each and every column, or beside each and every column. We have got the drop-downs beside each and every column. Now, we want to ensure that if it's revenue, we only have a single revenue item. If it's cost of goods sold, it's just cost of goods sold. Nothing like cost of goods sold, grocery, cost of goods sold, supermarkets, and all that. So what are we going to do? Move with me. So the first thing that we are going to do here, I want you to click on this drop down just beside financials. Click on this drop down just beside financials. Click on the drop down just beside financials. And that will lead us to this window here. And over here, you are able to see your different line items that you have. And these are all our line items within our statement. So what you do, just unselect all of them first. Well, so from here, the first line item that we want to map is the revenue. So after you unselect all, just come here and search for revenue. Sorry. Search for revenue. And just to ensure your accuracy, I just want you to unselect everything. When you search for revenue, it will come with this revenue item selected. So just for accuracy, unselect everything. Then once you unselect everything, check on them one by one. So other revenue, no. Other revenue is not part of this. We are only looking at revenue. Remember, other revenues, if you look from our format, we'll take this aspect of other income. So don't select other revenue. So select revenue discounters, revenue grocery, revenue retail, and revenue supermarkets. revenue discounters, revenue grocery, revenue retail, and revenue supermarket. So those are the main revenue lines or the main income lines for the company. The other ones are the extra sources of income from where they get, and we'll be able to account for them later. So for now, let's have revenue from discounters, revenue from grocery, revenue from retail, and revenue from supermarkets. Once you're done, click OK. Now, if you click OK, you realize that now what you have are only revenue line items. What you have right now are only revenue line items. There's nothing that is not revenue that is currently selected. So we want to map everything here so that we have it labeled or rather named revenue. We want to map everything here so that we have it named revenue. The question is probably at the end of the day, based on where we started, if you were to map everything based on what you are saying, then would we go to start typing everything one by one? No. So once you've done that, just come to your mapping column. Come to your mapping column. Of course, for the first revenue from markets, come to your mapping column. Then here, what do you want to call them? Do you want to call them revenue, or you want to call them sales, or you want to call them income? Whichever way you may want to call them. In this case, let's call them revenue. So type their revenue, control enter to remain in the same cell, control enter to remain in the same cell, and then you will simply autofill these. You will simply autofill this. You will simply autofill this. So you will autofill it to that point. You will autofill it to that point. And in doing mapping, please do not autofill with the concept of double clicking here. Kindly do the manual autofilling. For the first mapping line, it may work, but in the following mapping lines that you will be doing, it will not work. It will really inconvenience you. So in this case, I know there are two ways of autofilling. Normally, you do double tap so that you can easily autofill downwards without scrolling, or you can as well scroll down, or you can use some keyboard shortcuts, Control D, to highlight down to autofill downwards. So for now, we are just autofilling manually. You're just dragging everything down manually. Good. Now, with that, we have just mapped our first revenue item. We have just mapped our first income line item. We move to the second. And what's our second item? What's our second item? What's our second item? Our second item was cost of goods sold. Our second item was cost of goods sold. Once again, I will move back here to my filters. And then this time around, what do I need? I need cost of goods sold. I need cost of goods sold. So here I will come and search for cost of goods sold. That's what I have here. Cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold. I will be able to mark them. I have cost of goods sold from discounters, cost of goods sold from grocery, cost of goods sold from retail, and cost of goods sold from supermarkets. And cost of goods sold from supermarkets. Once I'm done, I'll be able to click OK here. I'll be able to click OK. I'll be able to click OK. I'm going to do the same thing that I did for the other case, but this time around, I'm going to call these cost of goods. I'm going to call them cost of goods sold. I'm going to call them cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold in the mapping column. Remember, we are doing cost of goods sold in the mapping column. Once I'm done, I'm going to control enter, and then I easily autofill this by dragging. I will easily autofill this by dragging it downwards. Good. So I'm done with the cost of goods sold. I'm done with the cost of goods sold. I move to the next item, which is other incomes. I move to the next item, which is other income. And of course, I know I have other revenues. Sorry. So here I have other revenue. I have other revenue. So I'm going to select on other revenue, then I say okay, other revenue, then I say okay. Then here probably I'd want to call it other incomes. Let me call it other incomes. I'd want to call it probably other incomes. Then I easily autofill this. I'd want to call it other incomes, then I autofill other incomes, and then I autofill that. Other incomes, and then I autofill that. Other incomes, then I autofill that. Next, I have the operating expenses. Next, I have the operating expenses. Back again to my financials. Back to my financials. Then I'll be able to look for my operating expenses. The operating expenses that I have here, let me first of all select everything. Good. Select everything. And then I'm going to pick my selling and administrative expenses. 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 So that is the only expense line that I have here. I will say okay. I will say okay. And then maybe I just want to give it a single name, expenses. Maybe I just want to give it a single name, expenses. For example, I just want to call it expenses. So I will name it expenses, and then I simply autofill everything. I will call it expenses, and then I will be able to easily autofill that. I will call it expenses, then I autofill that, expenses, and then I autofill. Then from expenses, after deducting my expenses, the next aspect is depreciation. The next aspect here is depreciation. The next aspect is depreciation. So back to my financials, I will select depreciation. So let me see if I have got depreciation from different sources. All right, I only have one depreciation. So I'm going to select on it. I say okay. And then I want to call it depreciation. I want to call it depreciation expense. I want to call it depreciation expense, and then I quickly autofill this depreciation expense. Then I quickly autofill that depreciation expense, and then I autofill it. After accounting for depreciation, my next item is interest. My next item is interest. So once again, I move back to financials. Then I want to look for interest. And here I can see interest expenses. Here I can see I have interest expenses. Here I can see I have interest expenses. So I'm going to select on interest expenses. Then I say, okay. And then what name do I want to give to these? I want to call them finance costs. I will control enter, then easily autofill these. I want to call them finance costs. I control enter, then I easily autofill that. So with that, I have now mapped my interest expense. And I'm only remaining with one thing here at the end of the day, which is taxes. Once again, I move back to financials. I will unselect everything. Then I look for taxes. And here I have taxes. So I will select it. I say, okay. So you can decide to retain the name, or you may call it tax expense as I want to call it. You may decide to retain the name or call it tax expense as I am calling it. I will control enter, and then I easily autofill. That. So that's a mapping for my tax expenses. Good. So we've just done all the mappings. So from here, now that we have done all the mappings. Now that we've done all the mappings, now just bring back all your line items by coming back to financials, and then you select all. Come back to financials, then you select all, and then you say okay. Go back to financials, select all, then say okay. Then say okay. Select all, and then you say okay. Now, having done that, just cross-check this. Just cross-check this. Look at this. This is revenue, supermarkets. The new name is revenue. Cost of goods sold, supermarkets. Cost of goods sold. Revenue discounters, revenue. Cost of goods sold discounters, cost of goods sold. Revenue grocery, revenue. And that's what we wanted to achieve at the end of the day. Now, how do you ensure that you've actually mapped everything? Because if you look at this data, then it's quite large, and therefore knowing that you have mapped everything may be a little bit tricky, or it may a little bit be a challenge. Now, for you to know that each and every line item here in the original financials column has to match, or rather has to have a corresponding name in the mapping column. So what you will do here, what you can do, you can easily use the count blank function. I believe you remember the count blank function. You can easily use the count blank function to count if you have any blank space here at mapping. So what you will do here, you just say equals count blank, just anywhere, equals count blank, equals count blank, and then the range is going to be this. So be at the first item, which is the revenue. Just click on the first revenue, and then we want to highlight everything here. We want to highlight everything here. So should I go scrolling down? All right, don't worry, do this. Hold on control. Make sure you've selected the first item here, which is revenue. After selecting that, hold on control, hold on shift, and then the page down arrow. Control, shift, page down arrow, like that. Control, shift, page down, arrow. Control, shift, page down, arrow. Control, shift, and page down arrow. It's very effective where you have a very, very large data set. Please do not start scrolling down. Do not start scrolling down. You'll be analog. So that's what you need to have. Once you're done, just execute it by enter. And then let's see if I have blanks. All right, good. So I have 0 blank spaces. I have 0 blank spaces, and therefore that means that I have mapped everything. That means that I have mapped everything. Good. Now from here, we want to proceed now to get, we now want to proceed to get what? We want to proceed to get now what we call our income statement. We now want to proceed to compute for our income statement. We want to proceed to compute our income statement now. We now want to compute our income statement. Now, first of all, I want you to do away with the filters by just moving back to data and then click on the filter icon. Move back to data, then click on the filter icon. Then from here, somebody should help me do this. Somebody should copy for me this mapping column, go and paste it in a new sheet, and then remove for me. Control V now. Control V to paste. Control V to paste. Control V to paste. Then when your data is still highlighted, with your data still highlighted, move over to data. We want to remove the duplicates. We just want to have, if it is revenue, it's just a single revenue. If it's cost of goods sold, it's just one. So move to data, and then from data tools, we have got the remove duplicates command. From data tools, we have remove duplicates command, and here it is. Remove duplicates. Remember, move to data. Then from data tools group, we have remove duplicates here. For some people, yours will be written remove duplicates. For some people, you'll just find this ladder icon. So click on that icon for remove duplicates. It says columns, the specific column that you want to remove the duplicates for. Well, we want to remove the duplicates for the mapping column. We want to remove the duplicates for the mapping column. Others may not see mapping. If you did not copy the data from mapping, then you may not see mapping here. But instead, you will see probably something like column A or revenue, something of a sort. If you have got the mapping title, then you will check on this box here which says my data has headers. You will check on this box here which says my data has headers. So for now, everything is okay. You're just going to click OK. And good. 434 duplicate values found and removed, and only 8 unique values remain. That counts may include empty cells, spaces, etc. All right, that's okay. And now we have everything. We now have everything. So this is revenue, cost of goods sold, expenses, depreciation, finance costs, tax expense, and other incomes. The reason why I wanted you to do this is because of the next activity that we are going to do that will be very, very crucial in terms of the spelling of your income line items. Good. And from here, just before we bring in our details, let's call this what? Let's call this details. It's normally called details or what? Or particulars. It's normally called details or particulars. So rename it details. Rename it details. It can be details or it can be particulars. It can be details or it can be particulars. Now, I just want us to do in a pre-formatting. Just a simple pre-formatting here. Just a simple pre-formatting. So here we have revenue minus cost of goods sold. We all know this gives us the gross profit. So just insert another row here. By highlighting row 4. Then you hold on Control Shift plus. Control Shift plus to add a new row. Control Shift plus, and then we will be able to call this what? Gross profit. We'll be able to call this what? Gross profit. We'll be able to call this the gross profit. We will be able to call this the gross profit. The gross profit. And then next, if we subtract expenses from our gross profit, once again, you will highlight row 6, Control Shift plus. And if we subtract, that should give us the earnings before depreciation, interest, and tax. That should give us the earnings before depreciation, interest, and tax. We less depreciation. That should give us earnings before interest and tax. We less finance cost, which is actually the interest. That should give us the earnings before tax. All right. The other income should be on the other side. Okay, we are going to take it there. We less tax expense. And that is going to give us our net profit. So these other incomes, we want to take it here. The other incomes should be coming just after gross profit. So add a line where you have your gross profit, add a line just below the gross profit, Come and click on other incomes, add a line just below the gross profit, come and click on other incomes, then place your cursor at any line here, at any line until you achieve this arrow that has, all right, I don't know how to call it. There is nothing on the compass direction thing with some arrows pointing up, down, left, and right. So have that. Then once you have it, simply drag these other incomes to this side. So you will click and hold on. Please don't right click, click and hold on, and just drag it to this space here like that. Or alternatively, you can just Control C, Control V. If the dragging is going to bring a problem to you, just Control C, Control V. The good thing with dragging is that it enables you to transfer even multiple data sets. Look at this. Here I have depreciation expense all the way down here. Assume I wanted to migrate all this data probably to somewhere here. So what will I do? Once I highlight them like this, I will just be able to easily place my cursor here. I click and hold on, and then I drag towards this side. And place them there. And there I have it. Maybe sometimes you want to drag them like that. You want to have the same information here, but retain a copy from where you've taken them. So what do you do in that case? If I have them here, let's say I just want to have these duplicates come here, and I don't want to do away with this. So place your cursor once again You hold on control, you click and hold on, and once again, drag it back. You hold on control, you click and hold on, and you drag it back. So you're now bringing the items here, but retaining the copy. You are bringing them here, but retaining the copy. That was by the way. That was just a by the way. That was just a by the way. Now, we've set everything. We've set everything. We've set everything. Let's see from our income statement. Do we have different years in our income statement? Do we have different years in our income statement? Here I can see the year 2014, 2015. Very good. We have different years. We have different years. We have different years. Now, this is what I want you to do. I want you to do this. Click on column C. Click on column C. Control Shift plus to add another column. Click on column C and then Control Shift plus to add another column. Then this column, name it year. Name this column year. Name that 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 column year. Then what we want to do with this is that we want to extract the year from this date that we have. We just want to extract the year only. I will give you the reason why we are extracting the year. For now, let's extract the year. How are we going to extract the year? Somebody will remember the year function, number one. Somebody will remember the year function. And number two, somebody will remember the text function. So you're going to type equals text equals text equals text. Then the first thing is the value. The first thing is the value. And the value, we did agree, is the date. So click on the first date here as the value. Click on the first date as the value. You put a comma. Next is the format. What do we need from that date? We need the year. We need the year. So for the format, have y to extract the year. Have y to extract the year. Have 4 y's. Have 4 y's. Have 4 y's so that you are able to extract the year. Once you're done, just enter. Once you're done, just enter. Remember before you enter, we said in the past class that the y's are text inputs and therefore they should be available in quotation marks. They are text inputs and therefore they should be available in quotation marks. Once you're done, hit on enter. And then you simply autofill this. Simply autofill that. So that extracts for us the year for each and every date. That extracts for us the year for each and every date. So you can see here now, I have the year 2014 all the way to the year 2016. Now, I'd want to prepare an income statement. That is for different years. So I want to have my income statement clearly indicating for the year 2014, 2015, and 2016. So at this point, I will have year 2014, 2015, and then 2016. That's what I want to have. The year 2014, 2015, and 2016. 2014, 2015, and 2016. 2014, 2015, and then 2016. 2014, 2015, then 2016. Now look at this. If you move back to our original sheet, we only have a single revenue line item. But what do we need? If I come back here to this sheet where I am preparing my income statement, if it's revenue at this point, I want to extract the revenue value for the year 2014 only. If I move here, I need the revenue value for the year 2015 only. At this point, 2016. And the same applies to all these other line items. I need expenses for the year 2014, 2015, and the year 2016 separately, but I need their totals. Therefore, what am I going to do here? Ladies and gentlemen, if somebody has heard about the sum if function, remember, if you move back to your income statement, then here you have got the revenue, remember, for the different line items of revenue from different sources, recorded on a separate date of transaction. And therefore, we want to get the summation of all these revenues. Somebody to move with me here. First of all, we all agree that we want to get the total revenue, which is actually a summation, but based on certain conditions. You will recall we did mention that if function is the only conditional function that we have in Excel, if is the only conditional function that we have in Excel. Therefore, if you'd want to perform any operation that is based on certain conditions, if the if function is not fitting in, then you'll have to have your original function to use merged together with the if function. In this case, what do we want to do? We want to do a summation, and therefore we will sum if. But remember, we don't have one condition. We have two conditions here. Condition number one, if you come to your income statement, these items are mixed up. We have got revenues, we have cost of goods sold, we have got expenses. But what do we need? We need the summation of revenues only. Like for instance, number one here, we need the summation of revenues only, but for the year 2014. So we need the summations for revenue for the year 2014. That takes us to the use of the sum ifs function. Ladies and gentlemen, sum if is where you have one condition only, but sum ifs, you use it where you have one or more conditions. Say equals sum ifs equals sum ifs. We are now extracting the total revenue for the year 2014 equals sum ifs. The first thing that is required is the sum range. What do we want to add? We want to add our revenue values, and therefore move back to your income statement. Move back to your income statement. And then the sum range is going to be these amounts. The sum range is going to be the amounts. So just click on the first amount, 900, Control Shift, page down arrow. That is our sum range. That is our sum range. That is our sum range. Don't mind going back. You have all the information available here. So just put a comma. Next is criteria range 1. Criteria range 1. What do we want? We want to extract the total revenue. Ladies and gentlemen, please use the new sheet that you formed. I mean, not the new sheet, but the new column that you created for mapping. Because if you use this, then you'll be forced to have revenues per markets, revenues, discounters, and all that. But we just need a single revenue line item. So for the criteria range, highlight all the mapping items. Highlight all the mapping items like that. Highlight all the mapping items. We are going to highlight all the mapping items. We put a comma. Then next we have criteria 1. Criteria 1. Now, from this criteria range, what do we want? We want revenue. For ease of autofilling, I want you to move back to your sheet 3. Move back to your sheet 3 and then click on revenue from here. Click on revenue from here. Here we have revenue. Click on revenue. Click on revenue. Now that is our criteria 1. Put a comma. Next is criteria range 2. Criteria range 2. And our criteria range 2, we need revenue for the year 2014. Therefore, our criteria range 2 is going to be the years. Our criteria range 2 is going to be the years. So click on the first year, 2014, Control Shift page down arrow to highlight all of them. You simply click on the first year 2014, then Control Shift page down arrow to highlight all of them. So that is our range. Then you put a comma. Then next is what? Criteria 2. Next is criteria 2. For criteria 2, come back to your sheet, then click on 2014. Come back to your sheet, then click on 2014. 2014. Click on 2014. And we are done. Now, just before you hit enter, I want to explain something. Notice here that we're being asked about criteria range 1, criteria range 2, criteria range 3, criteria range 4, and all that. Criteria 1, criteria 2, criteria 3, and all that. Please take note that the order in which you use the criteria doesn't matter. But what you need to note is that criteria 1 has to come from criteria range 1, and criteria 2 has to come from criteria range 2. What I mean is this. If you come to your income statement and then you choose your details, to be your criteria range 1, then your criteria 1 has to come from the details. You cannot select a year as your criteria 1. Criteria 2 has to come from criteria range 2, and criteria 3 has to come from criteria range 3. Good. Hit on enter. And that gives me 39,975 shillings as my revenue for the year 2014. 29,975 shillings as the revenue for the year 2014. Let's start again. So at this point, we are all in agreement. We are using the sum ifs function because we have got multiple criteria. So you say equals sum ifs equals sum ifs equals sum ifs. And the first thing is the sum range. What do we want to add? What do we want to add? We want to add these values here. We want to add the amounts. Just highlight all of them. Excel will pick up once you give all the instructions. It will pick on the specific things that you need. So just add all of them. Just add all of them. So that's our sum range. We put a comma. The next is criteria range 1. Next is criteria range 1. Next is criteria range 1. Note that for the criteria range 1, we can either decide to use the years or we can decide to use our mapped values. We are not using this, and that is the reason why we did mapping, because this one has got different line items. But for our income statement, we just need a single revenue line item. We just need a single cost of goods sold line item. We don't want cost of goods sold, grocery, cost of goods sold, discounters, and all that. That's why we're using the mapping column. So for criteria range 1, highlight everything in the mapping column. Please do not highlight mapping 2. Just start from the first line item called revenue, then Control Shift, page down arrow. Just click on revenue, then Control Shift, page down arrow. So that is our criteria range 1. Put a comma. Next is criteria 1. Just like I mentioned, criteria range 1 must come from, criteria 1 must come from criteria range 1. From this range here, what do we need? We just need revenue. For ease of autofilling, please move back to your sheet where you are preparing the income statement and click on revenue here. So I'm going to click on revenue there. I'm going to click on revenue, then comma. The next thing is what? Criteria range 2. Criteria range 2. And for the criteria range 2, here I have the years. For criteria range 2, here I have the years. So I'm going to move back to my income statement. I'm going to move back to my income statement. And then from my income statement, my criteria range, I'll be able to highlight all the years. Please note the date, the years. Not the date, the years. I believe somebody extracted the year. So we're going to use the years. Click on the first year, 2014. Control Shift page down arrow to highlight everything. Control Shift page down arrow to highlight everything. Put a comma. Next is criteria 2. Criteria 2 must come from criteria range 2. For ease of autofilling, go back to the sheet where you are preparing your income statement. Go back to the sheet where you are preparing your income statement and click on 2014 as criteria 2. And we are done. Just in case you had more inputs, you could do them. But for now, that is it. Just hit enter. We have 29,975 as the revenue for the year 2014. Now from here, you are taught that Excel does what? Excel automates things. You are told that Excel automates things. And what you're supposed to do from here is that you're supposed to autofill. Instead of going through the processes again, you're supposed to autofill. You're supposed to autofill. But oops, this is so annoying. Why is it giving me zeros? Why is it giving me zeros? I should be able to have values here. Just before you autofill, ladies and gentlemen, there are some formattings that you need to do. Look at this. If you are at this point, please, I want you to understand this. This is what we call the types of cell referencing. I believe Mwalimu taught this. And there are three types of cell referencing that you may use at any point in time. Number one, we have what we call the absolute cell referencing. The absolute cell referencing. The absolute cell referencing. Number two, we have relative cell referencing. Number two, we have the relative cell referencing. And at number four, we have what we call partial cell referencing. Partial cell referencing. Partial cell referencing. I believe Mwalimu taught this, and therefore I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to give you a quick overview. The absolute cell referencing, just as a reminder, this in absolute cell referencing, we normally lock both the row and the column. In relative cell referencing, we don't lock anything. And in partial cell referencing, we lock. If you have here N5, if you have here N5 as your what? As your cell, then if you have if you have absolute cell referencing, then what you're going to do is that you are going to have a dollar sign before 5 and a dollar sign before N. You're going to have a dollar sign before 5 and a dollar sign before N. The N here is the column representative, and the 5 here is the row representative. That is a relative cell referencing. By placing this dollar sign before N, you are locking that column. By placing the dollar sign before 5, you are locking that row. Relative cell referencing, this will just be N5. You will not have anything there. You want everything to keep changing as you move. For partial cell referencing, we said you lock. For partial cell referencing, we said you lock either the column or the row. By that, I have locked the column only. By that, I have locked the column only. And then, by having this, 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 I have locked the row only. I believe that gives a quick overview into what absolute cell referencing is, relative cell referencing, and partial cell referencing is. Let's see its application here. I'm at the first point, and please, I want us to move together so that you understand this. So if I'm here, look at my function here. Just back onto my formula bar. Let me just increase the zoom a little bit, though I'm not sure if this will affect the display at my formula bar. Let me just try increasing the zoom. All right. Now, from this point, if I go over here to my formula bar, then I choose sum range. Remember the sum range ni ile ambayo ilitoka from our original sheet. It is E2 through E436, and it is actually everything within the range of my revenue items, the mapped items. Then if I go to my criteria range 1, my criteria range 1 is F2 through F436. My criteria 1 is A2, which is here. My criteria range 2, C2 through C436, and my criteria 2 is actually B1, which is here. B1, which is here. B1, which is here. Now, what do we expect? What do we expect? What do we expect? We expect that we are going to maintain all our ranges. We expect that we are going to maintain all our ranges. I'm going through this very fast because I believe Mwalimu taught this. So first of all, you will know that as you autofill downwards or horizontally, what normally happens is that Excel moves one cell down or one cell to the right or one cell to the left, depending on how you are doing the autofilling. For any range that we will be using that we don't want to change, we will fully lock them. For any range that we will be using that we don't want to change, we will be fully locking them. Now, this is what I want you to do. Just lock all the ranges. Anything ambayo inaitwa range, lock. First one, just come here, click on sum range. And then how do you lock? F4. F4. Or if your F4 is not working, it should be Fn followed by F4. Fn followed by F4.
At the end of the day, you should be able to have these dollar signs in between like I have them here. You should be able to have all these dollar signs here. So you just click on sum range. It will automatically highlight your sum range, and then you click, you hit on F4, or if your F4 is not working, you hit on Fn followed by F4. Next is criteria range 1. Anything called a range, you to lock. So lock criteria range 1 to criteria 1 hapo tutarudi. We have criteria range 2. Criteria range 2 hiyo funga kabisa. So we have now locked all our range. We have now locked all our ranges. Now, I want to explain about the criteria. I want to explain about the criteria. I want to explain about the criteria. Now, look at this. If you are at cell B2 here, like in my case, your criteria 1 is revenue. Please, I want you to understand this from this perspective. If you are here, your criteria 1 is revenue. If you move here, what's going to be your criteria 1? Revenue, which is A2. If you move here, your criteria 1 is still going to be revenue, which is A2. You come here, your criteria 1 is going to be the cost of goods sold, which is A3. You come here, cost of goods sold, A3. You move here, your criteria 1 is depreciation expense. If you are at this point, your criteria 1 is going to be the depreciation expense for the year 2014. So depreciation expense is in A8. Here, A8. Tax expense, A12. There's something that I want you to notice as we speak. From that range, I'm maintaining the column A, but the rows keep changing. I'm maintaining the column A, but the rows keep changing. Therefore, what does that tell you about that? It tells you that I need to lock my column so that it doesn't change as I autofill. So we'll come back here. I select, or rather I look for criteria 1. And then here, I'm going to apply the partial cell referencing just by having my dollar sign before the column representative, which is A. So just before A, I'm going to insert a dollar sign. Remember, that is for criteria 1. I am maintaining the column, but changing the rows. And therefore, I'm going to lock my column A. Let's move over to criteria 2. For criteria 2, if I'm at this particular point here, I need the revenue for the year 2014. So what's my criteria 2 here? My criteria 2 is B1, which is the year 2014. If I'm at this point, my criteria 2 is going to be C1, the year 2015. At this point, D1, the year 2016. I move here. My criteria 1 is going to be B1, the year 2014. Here, C1, the year 2015, and here, expenses for the year 2016, D1. Somebody notices in that case, I am maintaining row 1 all through, but I'm changing the columns. Over here, I have column B, column C, and column D. So what am I going to do? I'm going to make sure that I lock the row so that it doesn't change because I am maintaining row 1. So for my criteria 2 here, ladies and gentlemen, come and click on criteria 2. Then what represents the row here? What represents the row here? What represents the row? Please start from the origin for ease of autofilling. Start from here, 29,975, and then criteria 2 is here. Criteria 2, what represents the row is 1. So I'm going to lock that one. I'm going to lock the 1. So I'm only placing the dollar sign before 1. Once I'm done, I will simply enter, then I re-autofill. I will simply enter, and then I do what? I re-autofill. I will simply enter, and then I re-autofill. Then I re-autofill. Very good. Now, everything seems to be okay now. So what we need to do is just the operations now. Remember, these zeros are here because we don't have gross profit or original range. We don't have the earnings before depreciation, interest, and tax in original range as well as this one. So to get this one, what did we say? Gross profit is simply what? Your revenue minus the cost of goods sold. You may now proceed just to do the workings.
So you can just underline this. You make the gross profit. And then you subtract other incomes. You can also underline this, just like that. And then, what is this? If I if I add other incomes, I should be able to get here the total income or the total revenue. Here I should be able to have my total revenue. Here I should be able to have my total revenue, which is equal to the gross profit. Then I add the other incomes like this. That's what I should be able to have. That's what I should be able to have there. Then I subtract expenses. I get the earnings before interest, depreciation, and tax, which is going to be equals to my total revenue here. I add it to what? Sorry, I subtract the expenses. The rest are just computations that you can do. So that's what you're supposed to do. That is what you're supposed to do. And at the end of the day, you will come up with your income statement. At the end of the day, you will have your income statement. And now, ladies and gentlemen, just like I promised in the past class, we were to end a little bit earlier because probably there are some people who are still at home and maybe you want to rush for jobs. So I want to stop at that point. Thank you.